Your shop's average order is $40, a number you quote with a little pride. And yet, almost every order that actually comes in is closer to 20, with a small handful of big spenders quietly hauling that average up to a place where nobody really lives. The average is not lying by accident. It is being dragged, and the word for exactly why it keeps getting dragged is skewness. Today, I want to talk about skewness, which simply means which way your data leans, how to measure that lean, and why it quietly decides whether the average you trust is telling you the truth or gently making a fool of you. I am not a statistician. I am someone who runs small businesses and spent years reading the average as if it meant typical, only to be ambushed again and again by the long tail hiding just off to one side. I have quoted an average order value that no real customer ever placed, planned stock around a figure that sat well above what most people actually spent, and wondered why the numbers never quite behaved. Skewness is the plain habit I now use to ask, before I trust any average at all, which direction my data leans and just how hard. Let me say plainly what skewness is. Skewness is a measure of how lopsided your data is, whether it leans to the low side or the high side, rather than sitting evenly around its middle. A perfectly balanced shape, where the left half mirrors the right, has no skew at all. The moment one tail stretches out longer and thinner than the other, that stretch is the skew, and the longer tail points in the very direction your data is said to lean. The kind you will meet most often in a small business is a right skew, sometimes called a positive skew. It happens because so many of your numbers clump hard against a floor of zero and then trail away into a long tail of large values. Revenue does it, order sizes do it, time on page, days to pay an invoice, customers won from a single referral. All of them pile up low and then reach out to the right with a thin tail of whales and stragglers. That long tail on the high side is the signature of a right skew, and it is the native shape of most business data. A left skew or negative skew is the rarer mirror image, where the long thin tail stretches toward the low side instead. You tend to see it when your values bunch up near a natural ceiling with only a few sad exceptions pulling downward. Think of a product rated mostly 4 and 5 stars, a comfortable crowd of happy reviews clustered near the top, with a thin tail of 1 and 2-star ratings dragging the shape to the left. Most of the weight sits high, and the lonely low values form the tail that gives the lean its name. Here is the fastest way to catch a skew without drawing anything at all, and it is worth memorizing. Put your average right next to your median, the true middle value with half your data above it and half below. On a right skew, the tail of big values hauls the average up above the median. On a left skew, the tail of small values drags the average down below the median. And when the two sit almost on top of one another, your data is close to symmetric. The gap between mean and median, and the direction of that gap, is skewness you can read in a single glance. This matters because on skewed data, your average quietly stops being typical. It describes a middle that almost nobody actually occupies, a point pulled toward the tail and away from the crowd. When your orders are right skewed, the average sits up among the big spenders, while most of your real customers live down near the median, spending far less. Quote that average as if it were the normal customer, and you will overstock, overpromise, and misjudge who you are actually serving. The median is the honest answer to what a typical value really looks like. If you want to see the skew rather than infer it, draw a histogram, which just sorts your values into buckets and shows how tall each bucket stands. A symmetric dataset looks like an even mound with matching slopes on both sides. Right skewed data looks like a wave that has broken to the left, a tall pile near the low end with a long shallow tail streaming off to the right. One honest picture like that tells you more about the shape of your business than a whole page of averages ever will. There is also a proper number for it, and most spreadsheets and analytics tools will hand it to you. A skewness value near zero means your data is roughly symmetric. A positive number means a tail reaching to the right, and the larger it grows, the heavier that high tail is. A negative number means a tail reaching to the left. As a rough working guide, a value within about half of zero is fairly balanced, and once you drift past 1 in either direction, you are looking at data with a serious lean that no symmetric rule should be trusted on. If you would rather not hunt for that statistic, There is a simple proxy you can compute in your head. Take the average, subtract the median, and notice both the sign and the size of what is left. A clearly positive gap, an average sitting well above the median, tells you the data leans right. A clearly negative gap tells you it leans left. It is not the exact figure a tool would print, but for the everyday job of deciding whether your average can be trusted, that little subtraction is very often all the skewness reading you actually need. Let me make it concrete, and please treat these as illustration, not benchmarks to copy. Say your median order is $22, but your average order is $40. That gap is not noise. It is a fat right tail of large orders quietly stretching the average to nearly double the value a typical customer actually spends. If you had priced or planned around the 40, you would have been designing for a customer who barely exists, while the real crowd sitting at 22 went unserved. The skew was not a rounding error, it was the whole story of who your buyers really are. A skew also quietly breaks the tidy rules you may have borrowed from the bell curve. The 2/3 rule, where most values are supposed to sit within one standard deviation of the average, assumes a symmetric shape and falls apart on skewed data. A target set 2 standard deviations out will flag heaps of perfectly ordinary values as strange. A forecast that treats next month as a neat balanced spread around its average will badly misjudge both the monster month and the dead one. Every one of those tools silently assumed no skew, and your lopsided data simply did not agree. Skewness should also change the single number you choose to report. Lead with the average of a right skewed figure and you will flatter yourself, because the tail of big values makes the whole business look richer and busier than the typical day actually feels. Lead with the average of a skewed wait time and you will soothe yourself, because the calm middle hides the unlucky tail of customers who waited far too long. In both cases, the average is technically correct and practically misleading, precisely because the data leans. So on skewed data, reach for the median first as your honest picture of the typical case and pair it with a tail percentile to show where the extremes actually live. The average still has its uses, especially for money, where total revenue divided by number of orders is a real and meaningful figure. Just stop asking the average to describe the normal customer when the data is clearly leaning, because that is the one job a skewed average cannot do without quietly deceiving you, and resist the urge to treat the skew as a defect to be scrubbed away. Very often, the lean is the most important thing your data is telling you, because the tail is exactly where your biggest customers, your worst delays, or your most loyal fans actually sit. Yes, there are honest ways to reshape a badly skewed number so that symmetric tools fit it better, and they have their place in serious analysis. But for the daily reading of a small business, you are far better served by tools that never demanded symmetry in the first place. It is also worth separating a genuine skew from a couple of freak values, because they can look alike at first. One enormous order landing in an otherwise tidy week can tug your average and mimic a right skew. But that is really a single outlier, not the shape of your data leaning. A true skew is a persistent lean of the whole distribution, showing up month after month, not one strange point you could name and remove. When you see the pull, ask whether it is the entire shape tilting or just one loud value shouting, because the honest fix for each is completely different. One warning before you lean on any of this too hard. A skewness reading needs a decent pile of data underneath it to mean much at all. On 15 orders, a single lucky whale can make your data look violently skewed one week and almost balanced the next, and the number will jump around far too much to trust. The median holds up on thin data better than the skew statistic does. So on small samples, read the mean against the median for direction, and treat any precise skewness figure as a rough hint until you have real volume feeding it. Every one of these explainers lives in writing at dataresearchanalysiscollection.com, the whole metric library in plain English, with skewness worked through on a real lopsided set of orders rather than a tidy textbook one, so you can watch the average drift away from the median as the tail grows. I keep it honest there for the same reason I keep it honest here. No promises about your results and no pretending a single statistic tempts a wild business by itself. Read it slowly with your own numbers open, and the lean will start jumping out at you everywhere. And hold the whole idea in proportion. Skewness tells you which way your data leans and roughly how hard, and that is genuinely useful, but it stops there. It will not tell you why the tail exists, it will not explain the big spenders or the slow payers, and it certainly will not straighten a lopsided business by being measured. All it really buys you is the judgment to stop trusting an average the moment your data tilts, which is worth far more than a confident number that quietly leaned the wrong way the whole time. So to recap, skewness is the lean of your data. A right skew when a long tail of big values pulls the average up above the median. A left skew when a low tail drags the average down below it, and near zero when the two meet and the shape is roughly even. Catch it in one glance by reading your average against your median. Confirm it with a histogram, and on skewed data, lead with the median rather than an average that no typical customer would recognize. Next time, I want to talk about kurtosis, the heaviness of that stubborn tail, how often the truly extreme events really strike, and why the calm-looking middle can hide them so well. I will see you in the next one.